Hi, my name is Scott Benjamin. I teach biology and environmental science at Bunker Hill Community College. I got into science because I'm particularly interested in the visual and hands-on aspect of teaching science. I like to have my students engage with the material, be a little more interactive. But some of the more important concepts in biology are hard to do an actual hands-on lab because of time restrictions or actual equipment restrictions and that kind of thing. And one of the concepts that I'm really interested in with my students in teaching is evolution by natural selection. And to really see this concept, it takes a long time, a lot longer than one semester usually. When that one is born, there's 3 with the regular beaks and 1 with a small beak. That fits that Punnett square. Yeah. It was hard to find a hands-on lab that could teach this concept. So it was a paper-based, students used little paper clips and picked up seeds and pieces of paper, trying to basically emulate birds on the Galapagos Islands or something like that. It worked okay, but a paper clip to a bird from some of the students with a concept like natural selection is a little difficult anyways. They weren't making that connection. So that led me to think, hey, maybe we could make a piece of software that shows birds that change over time and some genetic mutations and things like that.
Scott came in one day to the office and said, I got this great idea for this project and I want it to be fun and it's interactive and it's a lab for my class and what are your ideas? So we decided it was going to be a piece of software that he could bring into the computers in his classroom and that his students could use. And it got me, then my wheels started turning and thinking about what different types of software are out there, what would be the most appropriate to use. And it seemed like at the time, and even still now, I think it's really one of the most appropriate mediums is Flash. Thinking from the beginning and saying, we're going to use Flash, then I have a very specific set of parameters that I can go by, a very specific set of features I can go with. So that's the first step I did. Then we tried to figure out, what did this thing look like? And Scott had these great ideas.
You can see fungus on seeds and birds with different sized beaks, and you can even peer into their insides and see their DNA.
I started to think about that as a graphic language and started doing my research. And I go online and I look, at all sorts of types of birds, what kind of birds are tropical birds, and maybe using, maybe at this kind of tropical island as a setting. Scott would come in and we'd chit-chat about what I was working on and what his ideas. Then I'd spitball some ideas at him and I'd say, maybe the graphic language is a bit distressed because it's like the nature and it's kind of this rough terrain. And it's not this like clean kind of modernized environment, so the modernized environment and the modernized typography and the modernized graphics didn't really seem to be as appropriate. Even photography didn't really seem to be appropriate.
It's kind of funny when I look back at our first iterations of this when we had a bird. It was an actual photograph that we changed around. But Matt really helped bring in design concepts and visual concepts that I wouldn't have thought of because I'm coming at it from strictly, I've seen pictures of the Galapagos finches and, I want them to look this way, but Matt helped bring in a more stylized and in a way more efficient visual sort of background to work with the students.
Before we knew it, we were building the screens and putting each step together. And we were saying, okay, step 1 is, they come to this thing and, they get a little introduction about what this place is. And we came up with a name for the place. It's called Shadowbird Island. And these were the little shadow birds that lived on the island and went through this natural selection process.
It's interesting. You put something on the computer and we have digital kids, digital students, they're online and they're hooked up. And when it comes up, it's pretty visual, it's cool. It's got a cool factor. And there's the cool music in the rainstorm and the birds and stuff. And so I think initially it sort of engages the students. But what I have found is it actually works too. So it's not just the engaging bells and whistles, but I've tested them. There's a standard concept inventory for natural selection. I've gotten over 200 students where I give them the tests before they use this software and I give them the test after the software, and the software is really effective.
I thought maybe species may have developed because they needed to, whereas now I realize, like the birds, some birds may have just had bigger beaks by chance, and a bigger beak may have allowed them to eat bigger seeds. In the program, there were birds with smaller beaks, and they also needed less calories. There was no specific reason why they had that, why they evolved that way, but it just happened. So it was by chance, but it happened to be the better adaptation.
It definitely helps, just because it shows what we're talking about. We're seeing it happen, so when you see things, it kind of makes you learn more about it. I would rather see something instead of like seeing on a piece of paper. I'd rather see a video of something in order to help me. It helps me understand more.
By using the program, it was really like you could see it, you could work through the process, and sort of just made you start thinking about the variances between the big beaks versus small beaks. It really showed exactly what the process of natural selection, really sort of what that means.
It was definitely different from the typical kind of design work that I would do outside of Bunker Hill, or any kind of the programming or web work I would do outside of Bunker Hill. It was like this whole new client, which is not necessarily Scott, but the students, and thinking about how students come into things and the attitude of students now, and kind of looking at what students are into, how are they engaged. Everyone always says digital media this, digital media that, get students engaged, and it's like, yeah, we got to make sure that what we're doing is appropriate for them, and not just making digital media to make digital media, but it actually has a purpose.
I think this particular, concept lends itself to a digital context. Certain other things, I want my students to use test tubes and to measure chemicals and things like that. I'd rather not have that, a simulation on a computer screen. But something like this, where you can't have hands-on unless you want to send them out into the field for 3 years, that kind of thing, is really appropriate. And I like using the digital media for that kind of thing. It's not a panacea for everything, but it really is great for certain concepts.